Morgan's at Myriad.
Hi, it's Chris Titley here, live at the Myriad Festival. We're joined by Tony from ImagineX. Tony, thanks so much for being part of this.
You're welcome, Chris. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Tony, you've been around the startup scene for a long time here in Brisbane, a decade plus. Tell us what you've seen in the last decade or so in terms of changes.
Oh, in terms of changes,
yeah.
Wow, it's quite incredible. So it is well over a decade I've been sort of in this scene, but the last 5 years particularly, the ecosystem has just grown massively. And I think it's two things. One is actually the ecosystem and the density is improving, but also technology has just changed so rapidly in the last 5 years that it's super exciting.
And speaking of being super exciting, ImagineX, tell us about that.
So this is basically my advisory company, and work with a variety of companies on different things from power systems to crypto to, in this instance, and what we're here for today is actually about a flying car.
A flying car. Now,
yes.
It's been dreamed about in movies like Back to the Future 2, etc. But how close are we really? And tell us about the technology.
Well, I guess there's two parts to this story. One is actually the technology and what else is happening in the world. So if we look at places like Dubai and China and Uber in the States, they already have them. They're already doing these sort of flying cars. What they're both saying, we're actually going to have drone taxis in operation by the end of 2018. If you look at what China's doing with the EHang 184, absolutely phenomenal technology. What we wanted to do here locally, and when I say we, it's a joint venture between three companies, which is Next Gen Robotics, MTA Queensland, so the Motor Trade Association, and myself with ImagineX, is basically say we can actually do this in Australia as well. We can either be a consumer of technology or we can be a contributor. And if we wait any longer, we're just going to be a consumer again, so we actually want to contribute.
Now, I chatted to Steve Baxter early on, and that was his point of technology that he thought was a big focus in the future, being flying cars. Tell us a little bit about the logistics of maybe potentially how far they can go. Is it very similar to a normal car? And maybe the legislation that, in terms of air rights, etc.
Yeah, it's two very interesting questions there. The big issue with flying vehicles of any kind is basically power to weight ratio. So yeah, battery life, you think you have problems with ground-based cars and EVs, it's magnified 1,000 times basically with anything that's flying in the air. So range is quite limited at the moment, both in flight time and distance. So again, the EHang 184 out of China basically can fly at 100 kilometers an hour for 30 minutes.
Right.
So it's
wow.
basically, covering 50 kilometers different distance, which is amazing. So that will actually change quite rapidly. And that's the big thing. So it depends whether you're doing intra-city or inter-city flights. Are we doing short hops between high-rise buildings, or are we actually flying between city centres? And they're two fundamentally different designs that are being thought about with that.
This is blowing my mind about intra-buildings, and it's like thinking about a flight, but then thinking about a car put together, and you're like, how does this all work?
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing that's super exciting. Like if you want to go from one high-rise building to the next within Brisbane, then you can use an oversized drone. You can use a quadcopter or a hepcopter or whatever else. If you actually want to go further, then you've got to use something that's fixed wing. So a lot of designs at the moment are looking at doing a hybrid between the two. So how do you actually do something that has a vertical takeoff and landing, but also transforms into fixed wing, because then it takes less energy to keep it in the air.
Wow.
Super interesting.
Super interesting. And Tony, how far do you reckon you're off, or everyone's off in terms of a trial here in Australia, perhaps?
I've heard just over the last day that there's a couple of people that are working pretty hard on small scale stuff, which is why literally I met these guys, Next Gen Robotics, 4 weeks ago. And we turned around.
Talk about pace of being involved. Yeah.
And we sort of basically said, between them and MTAQ, it was a case of, oh, we're thinking of doing this, and Tony, we hear you talk about flying cars, what do you think? And so for Myriad, they were basically wanting to produce a 1/9 scale drone model, which is exactly what they've done, and that flies, and that's a marvelous piece of equipment, been 3D printed, and we can show you that later. And I said, well, we're 3 weeks out from Myriad. If you want to make an impact, let's build the full-size thing. And so these guys and a team have basically worked tirelessly for the last 3 weeks. And to the stage we've got it to now, we finished that at 4 p.m. yesterday afternoon, just in time to put it on the truck. And we're still waiting for a few bits and pieces to turn up, but we're hoping to have the first test flight within about 2 to 3 weeks from now.
2 to 3 weeks, wow. Tony, thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the conference and get some good feedback on the product that you guys are building.
Myriad's an awesome experience. It is last year, it will be again this year, and it's we're getting some amazing interest, so super cool.
Thanks very much.
Excellent.